Greetings, gentlemen and ladies. I am the Crypto Game Snob, and in today's video, we are taking a look at the best death cards in the Divine Order pack. Actually, what we did last time is a bit of a rundown of all the cards in the nature set for Divine Order. We're going to do the same, and I'm going to let you know what I think of each card, and let you know what I think, which ones are the best of the best of the best, and so forth. Now, of course, keeping in mind that good cards and best cards are kind of relative to what deck you're playing, and a bad card in one deck can be a great card in another deck, so everything with a grain of salt. But let's kick things off with the Barbed Fly. Now, this is a solid 3/3 stat creature with a roar of deal 1 damage to each god, and if you're frenzied, deal 3 damage instead. Now, this can be kind of good, kind of useful, kind of situational if you want to trigger a frenzy effect with 3 mana without also having to soul burn. Soul burn, of course, only costs 1 additional point of mana to get that frenzy effect, but this is a nice 3/3 solid stat card for dropping a creature on the board, and then of course getting that frenzy effect, which is kind of nice, so that's not too bad. Medium, I would call this a very medium card with some situational application. Next up, we have the Desecrated Shrine backline. Can't attack. At the start of your turn, deal 2 damage to both gods. Once again, kind of an interesting card for death. This is only a 1 mana card with backline, and a 0/4 makes it kind of sticky and hard to remove. And the thing about this card is that you are going to trigger that frenzy effect automatically every turn without needing to worry about soul burn. And if you're trying to get yourself to 15 health or below, this will help to get you down there, which is good for death, but not good for your opponent, typically speaking. So interesting. I'm going to call this one an interesting card with some interesting potential meta that could come out of it. I haven't played around with it much, but it's an interesting one, some interesting possibilities. Here we have Pan Forge Master. Again, kind of an interesting bit of text with a roar of give 1 armor to your other nether creatures. Now, if you're playing some sort of zombie death deck, +1 armor on your zombies suddenly might make them a little more difficult to remove. Now, not a lot of things hit for only 1 point of damage, but some things do. You have like your tracking bolt, which would do 1 damage to everything and clear it off unless it all has +1 armor. So it could situationally make your zombies, your zombie death card deck a little bit more difficult to deal with if you can drop that down. 3/3 stats on a 4 mana creature are a little bit low, but not too bad, and is interesting. This could potentially be interesting in some sort of zombie death deck. I don't see it get much play. I don't think I've ever seen it played. I've tried to play it a couple times and I've never been able to, just because the timing hasn't lined up, but there's some interest here. All I can say is I don't know how this one could play out in some meta, but it's interesting. Next up, we have the Inexorable Raider, which is a 3 mana card with 3/2 health. It has the Blessed effect, which is nice to get some more favor, and then Afterlife summon a 1/1 zombie, so you're basically getting a 4/3 creature for 3 mana, which is basically what you can expect to get, 4/3, 3/4, whatever the case may be, and then you get a nice Blessed effect on top of that. It's a solid card, it's a solid creature card, it's not too bad, not too good, not too bad. Next up, we have Blood Armor. Set one of your creature's armor to 1 and deal 2 damage to your god. Now, this is only a 1 mana card, and very early on in the game, 1 point of armor could potentially be helpful, but yeah, nothing too exciting here, nothing to really write home about. It also comes with a bit of a downside, dealing 2 damage to your god, unless you're trying to get to 15 health or below, in which case that might be good. Again, like I say, it's hard to sometimes judge good and bad cards because it really often depends on your deck configuration and the kind of meta plays that you're going for. This might be the perfect card if you're going for something really specific, some sort of niche setup, right? So anyway, Harrowing Vision. I think this is one of the cheapest card. I don't think I've seen it played. Draw 2 cards. If you're frenzied, draw 3 instead. Now, the big problem I see with this is that it costs 4 mana. Now, you do get a couple of card draws out of it, but Death has so many good ways of drawing cards already, like Vrock and Famished Ghoul, and just like a lot of ways to draw cards. Spending 4 mana and only getting 2 cards out of it, or pipping into a frenzy effect with Soul Burn, spending 5 mana to get 3 cards. I mean, it is a good, decent little card draw, but I feel like Death has some better ways to draw cards than that. Probably why it's one of the cheapest. I mean, I've never seen it played, right? And it's one of the cheapest cards you can buy, so not too popular, I think, in the current meta. Now, this one actually is kind of interesting. Outnumber the living. Summon a 1/1 zombie for each enemy creature, and if you're frenzied, summon 2 for each instead. So if your opponent has only 2 creatures on the board, which is basically all the time, right? Worst case scenario, it's hard to get a board with less than 2 creatures. And you trigger a frenzy effect with Soulburn, suddenly you've got 4 zombies on the board for a cost of only 3 mana. That is basically 8 stats on the board, 8 stats on the board for only 3 mana. Yeah, that's worth the price of admission. You could even get up to 6 zombies on the board, and now you've got, what is it, 1, 2, yeah, like 10 stats for 3 mana. That's a very interesting card. Very similar to Mass Rise, and all you need is that frenzy effect, which is basically the same as a 4 mana, like a frenzy. 1 mana frenzy plus 3 mana for the card gets you basically what a Mass Rise does, and the only catch is that your opponent needs to have some creatures on the board, which makes this a tiny bit difficult to actually use, because if your opponent has a couple creatures on the board, they're probably going to be able to deal with your zombies pretty easily, but you do get healing after each one. So a solid and interesting card in zombie death decks for sure. Now we have the Cursed Hoplite with Armor 1, Afterlife, summon a skeleton with 1 armor. This seems not the best, honestly. Armor 1 is kind of silly. I mean, if you were fighting another zombie death deck, maybe, you know, it might protect you against some zombie attacks, but the situational usefulness of this is really specific. And for 3 mana, you only get 1 health. This card would be very easy to clear, and then you only get a 1/1 skeleton with 1 armor, which is very easy to clear. You're basically getting 2 stats for 3 armor, or 3 mana. I mean, I've never seen it played, and I wouldn't really want to play it. I don't think it's a very good card, but it's not terrible. It's not the worst. You know, you could trade pretty well with that 3 points of damage, but yeah, nah, very medium, kind of uninteresting. Alright, so next up we have the Plague Talisman. After you damage a creature with this relic, if a creature survives, transform it into a 1/1 zombie. Now this is only a 4 mana card, and you can swing with this twice. You will basically transform 2 of your opponent's creatures into zombies. Now if you're swinging at bigger creatures, right, think this is basically a Ratify. Right, this is basically a 4 mana Ratify that you can use twice, you know, without any mana. You can spend mana on it once, only 4 mana, and your second swing costs no mana basically, and it's basically a Ratify. So interesting. Definitely has some powerful potential on the Plague Talisman. If Death didn't have so many other good talismans right now, you'd probably see this one getting a lot more play. But Death has a lot of good. Talisman. Death has a lot of good relics, is what I guess I was trying to say. Next up, we have the Voracious Fiend. Different from a Voracious Friend, this is the Voracious Fiend with Leech, a 2/2 stat, 2 mana creature, which is okay, especially since it has Leech, so you get a little bit of healing out of it, and you also get an Afterlife 1/1 zombie. So this is basically a 2 mana, 3/3 card with Leech, right? So 3/3 mana, 3/3 Leech, 2 mana card with Afterlife. That is very solid. Like, that is actually very good. When you consider the healing effects that you get out of it, the fact that you get all of those stats, and the fact that it only costs 2 mana, and you have an Afterlife which protects it, which gives you something to work with on your next turn. This makes it a little bit more difficult to entirely clear this card off the board, because, okay, your opponent swings into you, clears this out, and ends their turn, and you have something to work with on your next turn for triggering a frenzy effect or dealing with a low health creature or something. The Voracious Fiend, I'm a fan. I like the Voracious Fiend. It's pretty decent, pretty good. Next up, pull the strings. We deal 5 damage to your god and pull a creature that costs 5 or less from either void onto your side of the board. Now, 5 damage is a decent amount of damage to do to your god, but Death often likes to get to low health, so we can summon up nether spawns or trigger all sorts of different 15 health or less effects. And pull the strings, potentially pulling up to a 5 mana cost creature from either side of the board, makes this potentially a good bang for your buck. At only 3 mana, you could potentially get 10 mana worth of cards onto your side of the board. Interesting potential. I haven't seen it played, but I kind of want to play around with it a little bit more. You can see the value of this has actually gone up quite a bit in recent days. Maybe people are experimenting with the meta on pulled strings. Interesting for sure. Next up, we have Mass Rise, or Mass Raise. I don't know which one. This is a great card. I use this card a lot in my zombie death decks. It just fills the board full of 1/1 zombies. Basically, it's very hard not to be able to summon 5 zombies. If you're playing a Soul Burn death deck, you Soul Burn once, you throw this down, and you at 5 mana, and you got 5 zombies on the board. Fills up your board. Yeah, it's just nice. 5 zombies equals 5 points of health, of healing, unless your opponent clears them with a spell. Okay, next up we have the Plague. Now this is interesting. This is sort of your non-Genesis your non-Genesis Apocalypse Now, except it's not really that good, but also at the same time it has potential to maybe even be better. It really depends on how much of the board you control, if you control the board or not. Right, so Apocalypse Now destroys all creatures and then destroys all creatures again. Wipes the board, basically guaranteed. Right, this, on the other hand, has potential to transform only all of your opponent's creatures into 1/1 zombies. Right, if you're frenzied, you only trans your opponent's creatures into zombies. If you're not frenzied, it transforms everything into zombies, which might be okay. If you're playing zombie death deck, you have zombies anyway. Now, on the downside, this will give your opponent some 1/1 creatures with Leech. But on the upside, if your opponent has a whole full stacked board of, if you're playing against an aggro nature or aggro war that's all stacked up and has a full board, this could really swing things around in your favor. Unless you're dealing with a totally empty board, then it will still be difficult to actually make this card useful. But if you have something on your board and you drop this down, and you could potentially seriously swing the game with the Plague. And I don't see this card played much, but I think it has potential. I think it has some untapped potential that could be very good. Okay, next up we have the Overseer of Vitality, with a roar of give -2 health to each enemy creature and +2 strength to each of your other creatures. Anyway, this is kind of expensive at 7 mana, but it acts like a bit of a board wipe if your opponent has creatures of 2 health or less. At 7 mana, your opponent probably won't have too many of these out, but they may, depending. It really depends. 5 stats is a bit on the low side, but potentially buffing up your board of like 1/1 zombies. This could be quite good. Suddenly you've got 5 zombies on the board that suddenly become like 3/1 zombies or something like that. And so that could potentially be very game swinging. Okay, let's move on to the Decaying Rhino. Now, there is just no way to deny that this is an extremely powerful card, a huge creature on the board. At only 4 mana, you get a 5/6 stat card. That is bigger than even Nature's 4 mana cards, and Nature is known for its big cards. At the end of your turn, this creature takes damage unless you are frenzied, which is not usually a problem with death because you have Soul Burn. You're often playing a zombie death deck, so this creature doesn't even take damage. Even if it did, it wouldn't really be that problematic because this creature has 6 health already. 5/6, huge creature. It's just 4 mana. This thing is very scary at 4 mana. You could even pip into this at 3 and just have such a powerful big creature on the board that your opponent is going to be like thinking about conceding the game when he sees that drop early on. Decaying Rhino, that's a big bad card. Okay, next up we have the Undead Roach. This is, again, situationally interesting. It can sometimes be worth nothing. Worst case scenario, you have a 2/2 creature that you could potentially play over and over and over again. If you swing into another creature that kills this, you get it right back into your hand. Right? If your opponent kills this and you're not frenzied, now of course you lose it. So you kind of want to use this to kind of perform assassination trades, as it were, and like your opponent loses their card, but you get yours right back, type thing. That's kind of the best way to do it. So interesting. 2/2 is fairly solid. 1 mana, fairly cheap. Well, that's fairly cheap. That's about as cheap as you can go for a card. There's nothing below 1 mana, well, except for 0 mana, but that's kind of special. Anyway, the Undead Roach is a solid card, certainly. Death Watch Elder. Blessed. At the start of your turn, if your god has 15 health or less, deal 3 damage to the enemy God. Again, a very solid 3/3 stat creature that has potential to just sort of pick away at your opponent and trigger that frenzy effect at the start of your turn, each turn, without needing to trigger that soul burn or whatever. So this is just a great way to trigger frenzy. And 3/3 is a solid at 3 mana, very solid. This only comes into play at when your god is at 15 health though, so this is kind of later on in the game, which makes it kind of more difficult to implement as compared to using this earlier on, right? Because at 15 health, you're kind of struggling for your life. You're needing to make some bigger plays oftentimes. But situationally, this could be a good card, could be interesting. I would like to play with it earlier on in the game, but at 15 health, it has some interesting application. You know, it really, like I say, Death is very much dependent on the design of the meta of their deck, because a lot of cards in Death's deck seem good or bad on the surface, but they play in a very interesting way, because Death is a very interesting god to play with a lot of interesting tricks. Okay, next up we have the miasmic. We have this forge here is what we have, which has backline, can attack, and whenever you summon a creature, give it +1 armor at the start of your turn, deal 2 damage to your god. Again, if you're wanting to get your god to 15 health, this is potentially a way to do it. If you're summoning up a bunch of zombies and you want to make sure they always have armor, this is potentially a way to do it. If you're summoning even some big creatures and you want to make them somewhat more sticky on the board, this is another way to do it. So this is an interesting card. I don't see it played a huge amount, but I would call it solid, interesting, and could be good in some certain deck designs. Definitely an interesting one. Corpse Explosion. Now this one, if you're playing a zombie death deck, has the potential to be a game ender if you can line up your board just right, which isn't too hard to do because with a death deck you have so many options of summoning zombies. So you could play something like Mass Raise, get 5 zombies on the board, drop down Necronomics, get 5 mana refreshed, and then drop down a Corpse Explosion, and now you have 3 times 5 damage to your opponent's god, which is what, 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, like 15 points of damage in a single turn. So you could potentially do some interesting things with Corpse Explosion. I haven't had it played on me yet. I haven't played it yet. Actually, I have played it once yet. I didn't finish the game with it, but it was a big hit, and it was a heck of a lot of fun to play. I feel like there's some interesting potential with this card. It might not be much used yet, but I feel like there's some interesting potential with that one. Now this is one that theoretically, again, every card with Death has some interesting potential in the right setup, in the right sort of deck design, right? So we have a 5 mana 8/8 dragon called the Rotted One. The downside is that if you have 20 cards in your hand and void combined, this deals 10 damage to your god. That being said, sometimes the downside for Death is an upside, right? Like if you want to race your way down to 15 health and then use some nether spawns, what's the one called there? Acolyte. What's the 2 mana? I think it's Acolyte, something Acolyte, that summons a 6/6 nether spawn. This might be a way to put a serious threat on the board, and then you've got your Acolytes ready for a little bit later, just getting a huge amount of stats out there, serious threat on the board early on. The Rotted One is a very interesting one. I haven't had it played on me yet. I've tried to play it a few times. It has not gone well, but I feel like there is some deck design that could really make use of that and make it interesting. Okay, alright, so this is probably one of Death's best cards in Divine Order. So the Cursed Obelisk. Backline with can't attack, and at the end of your turn summon a 1/1 zombie with leech, but if you're frenzied, summon 2 zombies. So basically every turn you're frenzied, and you can trigger your frenzy with Soul Burn super easily. You summon 2 zombies every turn. Each zombie gives you one point of leech in addition to 1 point of damage to whatever creature you're dealing with, of course. Your opponent is going to spend all their time trying to deal with your zombies to get to this Cursed Obelisk and try to take it off the board, because every turn this goes off, you get another 2 zombies. If you combine this with Necroceptor, now you're getting 3 zombies, or you drop down a Mass Raise or Outnumber the Living, and suddenly you've just got so many zombies, more zombies than you even know what to do with. Cursed Obelisk, maybe one of the best death cards in Divine Order. Very powerful. Certainly, even in decks that are not specifically zombie death decks, this is a very handy card just to have this sticky thing on the board that's constantly generating you healing, constantly generating you threat. Yeah, super strong card, really, really good. Next up, we have the Nether Swarm Lord, which is a very good combo card for zombie death decks, and that is because all of your zombies are nether creatures. Basically, a lot of what you'll play in the zombie death decks are all nether creatures, and this, at the end of your turn, gives +1/1 to each friendly nether. Which is great. You can also draw a card each turn that you're frenzied with this bad boy. He's got okay 3/5 stats, so he's not the easiest to clear, not the strongest, but dropping down a 1/1 on your board full of zombies, +1/+1 on your board full of zombies, really buffs up those zombies. Suddenly, if you got 4 or 5 zombies down, you've got like 8 or 10 points of threat on the board in terms of damage, and then in terms of like healing yourself up as well. You could drop down this guy, you know, on buff up 4 zombies, and you've got 8 points of healing out of that. Nether Swarm Lord. This is a very good card. Absolutely very good card. Next up, we have the Triage Necromancer. At the end of your turn, summon a random 1 mana creature from your void. Now, this is a solid 5/5 stat card, so okay. With the additional effect of summoning a 1 mana creature from your board, which is probably going to be a zombie for the most part. Now, you could potentially use this with some, again, like death is so interesting because there's so many metas and so many tricky ways you can play with death. It's very difficult. This is probably the most difficult god to rank in terms of which cards are the most powerful and which aren't, because they all could situationally be terrible, or they could all be situationally game changing, right? So I don't know, you stack your deck full of 1 mana creatures that are, I don't know, have an afterlife effect that you want to trigger over and over, and this card brings it back every single turn. Potentially very interesting. Again, potentially kind of weak as well, right? So that's the funny thing about death decks. Next up, we have Takhat, the Forgotten, a 7 mana creature with 2/5 stats. At the start of your turn, and roar, summon the strongest creature from your void to the board, give it Soulless, and if it's an Anubin, also give it Blitz and Leech. So I don't have a lot of experience with how well this card works in actual gameplay. The text is interesting, yet again, with death decks and death cards. There's so many interesting things you could do with this, but again, it could be terrible as well, right? Depending on your configuration. Okay, next up we have the Necroceptor. This might be, again, one of death's best cards. At the end of your turn, summon a 1/1 zombie with Leech, and if you're frenzied, give that zombie +1/+1, so basically a 2/2 zombie every turn, and that's just every turn. For 3 mana, you can continue to get tons and tons of value out of this card, basically until your opponent clears it with relic removal. We don't see a huge amount of relic removal in the game, so this card can be in your hand, basically in your game for the whole game for 3 mana, generating 1/1 or +2/2. So the value that comes out of this, not to mention the healing that you get from the leech of each of these zombies. Yeah, this is just a huge value card. It's no wonder this is actually Death's most expensive card, really, except for some of the legendary cards. We have Eva here, and Arc of Amemmos, right, we have the Arc here. Necroceptor, maybe Death's most powerful card. Possibly maybe. Next up, we have Eva, Baroness of the Dead. Now, this can be a very good early game stall card if you're dealing with an early game aggro deck, like a nature deck or a war deck or something like that. The afterlife on this is to summon a random creature that costs 3 or less, transform a random creature is what I meant to say, that costs 3 or less into a 1/1 zombie, and then give it this afterlife. So this afterlife can bounce back and forth basically continuously until there's no 3 or less cost creature on the board. So basically what this does is it has the potential to waylay your opponent, just kind of slow them down by constantly turning their creatures into 1/1 zombies, taking them off the board early on in the game, helping you to stall until the later game, which is maybe where you're planning to make your move, whatever the case may be. So Eva, Baroness of the Dead, is an interesting card. I would call it solid, and again, just like all death cards, it seems situationally very powerful and also situationally kind of detrimental. That's the funny thing about Death. Death's own cards can make it or break it, really. Like, Death is a very interesting god to play. Probably one of the more tricky gods to play because there's just so many things you can do with it, and so many arrangements that can be, like I say, either very bad or very good. Next up, we have the Ark. We have the Ark of Amemos, is how I think I'm going to say that, with backline. After a friendly non-zombie creature dies, summon a 1/1 zombie. Okay, so it's automatically going to put zombies on the board for you. It's a very solid 3/7 stat card with backline, making it difficult to clear. You have a roar ability to also summon 3 1/1 zombies. So you drop this on the board and it immediately summons 3 zombies, and then every turn you can continue to summon 3 more zombies. Yeah, I would call this card very good. I don't see it played a huge amount because Death has so many zombies on the board from so many other places, you don't often even need it. But theoretically, hypothetically, this could and should be a very good card. The text is very good on it. I don't see it get a lot of play, but you know, if you run out of zombies, I guess here's another zombie generator for endless, infinite, unlimited zombies. You can never have too many zombies. Okay guys, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Yeah, like I say, Death is one of those gods that is kind of difficult to really judge cards in terms of this is the most powerful, this is the least powerful, because so many of Death's cards can be terribly, terribly bad for your game and also terribly, terribly good for your game. And it really comes up to how the deck is stacked and also luck of the draw a lot of the times when you draw the cards you need. Yeah, Death, very interesting, trickier god to play, very interesting god to play with a lot of very meta plays available. Okay, hope you've enjoyed this video.